The person you're speaking to is not the enemy. You care about them, and the reason why you're speaking is to make things better because you live there. It's in your interest to make things better. Wake up.
Welcome to Love Link, your guide to love and connection in all forms. We're your hosts, Simone Humphrey and Sina Simon. Our guest today is Terry Real, founder of Relational Life Therapy, an approach to couples therapy that values truth-telling and accountability and fosters intimacy and communication. He is the author of many best-selling books on relationships, including his most recent, Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship, which we would recommend to anyone seeking to develop a more fulfilling connection with their partner. Terry, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you about your work and about your new book.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a great joy to be here with you too.
Yeah, we had such a great experience talking to you last time. Actually, it's one of our most popular episodes, the one we did with you on narcissistic men.
Yeah, no shortage. It's like fission. There's there's no shortage of raw material.
Yeah,
So,
so many people coming to us and having these aha moments, these light bulbs.
yeah.
So tell us, maybe just for context for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about relational life therapy and how it differs from other forms of couples treatment.
A relational life therapy, or RLT, everybody's got their abbreviations. Relational life therapy is a school, really, a method of treating both individuals and families, but mostly couples, that came out of my work with men and depression. My first book, as you know, was back in the 90s. It was called I Don't Want to Talk About It. And it was the first book ever written about male depression. Before that book, depression was seen as a woman's disease, much like alcoholism had been seen as a men's disease back in the 40s and 50s. And so I'm proud of my role in putting male depression on the map. And what I believed and said in the book is the book is really not just about men and depression. It's really about what our culture, patriarchy, which is our culture. Patriarchy is the water, and we are the fish that are swimming in it. To this day, all of us, 50 years of feminism has changed some, but we all still live in a patriarchal culture. And as I take on in my new book, which I'm sure we'll get to, an individualistic, anti-relational culture. Anyway, the book was about what patriarchy does to boys, the imposition of the male code on sensitive, big-hearted, sweet little boys. And the imposition of that code, and everybody knows what the imposition is. You're taught to be tough, to be independent, to leave your mother, to leave all vulnerability aside and enter into the delusion of masculinity, which is I'm not in nature, I'm above nature, and I control it, and I'm in charge, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm never weak, and I'm never sad, and it's just such bullshit. And what I said about boys is what feminist psychologists like Carol Gilligan and the women of the Stone Center have been saying about girls for years, which is the imposition of this code is traumatic. That the way it's imposed is through shame and violence. That's how the transmission occurs. And what I said in the book is that the cost of disconnection in boyhood are disconnected men in adulthood. And the healing move for men, the healing move for girls and women has been empowerment. The wound is disempowerment. And the healing movement is to re-empower them. And I have some things to say about women in power, because there's power and there's power. Women can shape up in the ways in which they're being powerful these days. They can be more relational as they're being powerful, but we'll get to that. But the wound to girls, if you read Carol Gilligan's work, is at the edge of adolescence. 12, 13, 14. They stop telling the truth and they over accommodate. And the healing move for girls and women is re-empowerment, helping them find their voice, in Carol's famous phrase. The wound for boys is 3, 4, 5. It's almost pre-verbal, and it's intense. And it's about disconnection. The way we turn boys into men in our culture is through disconnection from their feelings, from vulnerabilities, from their real wants and needs, from others. It's just a shit show. And the way this disconnection is enforced is through violence, through emotional, and even, depending on where you live in the country and how unlucky you are, physical violence. And what I said is that the cost of this violence in boyhood is violence in adult men, violence that gets self-medicated, violence that gets acted out. But what I believed is that the healing move for men is reconnection. And people would bring their men to me to fix them, and I would only fix them in their relationships. Because what fixing men meant is reintroducing them to the world of relationality, the world that traditional masculinity pushed them out of at 3, 4, 5. So I believe that what was healing to men is discovering relational connection, being really connected to yourself, your feelings, and then connected to others. Well, as I began to work with men in their relationships, because I am a family therapist, and I thought the best way to teach men how to be relational is to bring the relationships into the office and teach them. What it dawned on me is that everybody needs to be relationally connected. And RLT, Relational Life Therapy, is about equipping our clients to live fully relational lives. It's what we're born for. It's what the human body operates. Intimate connection. There's a famous study that says the lack of intimate connection in a person's life is as physically damaging to their body as smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. We are born to be relational. It is what cures us. What we self-medicate when we self-medicate is the pain of not being relational, not being in a good relationship with ourselves and others. So I began to focus on really restoring a good relationship to oneself, first of all, and to others. And there's a technology to that. There are ways of standing up for yourself and being loving at the same time. Our culture does not teach us that. There are ways of listening to an upset person and helping them be less upset with you. Our culture doesn't teach us that. So what evolved was relational life therapy. It has 3 phases, which we'll get to. The first I call joining through the truth, or waking up the client. This is loving carefrontation, as a friend of mine put it. This is me saying, Sina, this is the thing you do over and over again that will always blow your foot. You will never, we talk about dysfunctional relational stances. You're half of the vicious circle that you keep repeating over and over again. For example, angry pursuit is a dysfunctional stance. You will never get your partner closer to you by complaining angrily about how they're not close to you. That is never going to work. And so the first thing we identify in relational life therapy is, what are each of these 2 people doing that dooms them to failure, that they keep repeating over and over? What's the vicious circle that they're in? And we teach our therapists to say the more. You should be able to say the more by the end of your first session. The more Sina pursues Simone, the more Simone distances, and the more Simone distances, the more Sina pursues. The blame is on the pattern, not the people. So that's the first thing we identify. And we wake you up. Sina, bitching to Simone about what a horrible partner she is not what we call inviting. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not. This is not going to work. So that's waking up the client. And there's an art We call it joining through the truth. We have a 2.5-year training program. I invite all professionals listening to come join us. You don't have to do the whole two, and you can start, get a taste of it and see if you like it. But it takes 2 years to learn how to confront. The art is confronting somebody right out of the starting gate in a way that is so empathic, so loving, and so accurate that they trust you more because of the confrontation, not less. They're closer to you because you've nailed them. In therapy school, I learned first you form the alliance and then you tell, like 2-3 years later. Forget it. We tell difficult truth right out of the gate, and we grab you by addressing the truth with you. But there's a lot of skill involved. The second phase is trauma work, inner child work. People are right. Once you're trauma triggered, skills go right out the window. So we have to deal with the part of you that's been traumatized. Once we get, if I may, Sina, because I know this is not you, by the way, once we get that you're an anxious attachment style, the next question is, where did you learn this from? That attachment style comes from the part of you we call the adaptive child part of you. What were you adapting to? And then we move into family of origin. Then we take you back to that little girl who learned to be terrified of abandonment. We do inner child work. It looks, the shorthand is this piece of it, many people think looks a lot like IFS. There are some big differences, but it's parts work. We get the adult Sina to encounter that little girl who learned to pursue or die. We get you to form a relationship with her, put your arms around her, and take care of her, and not foist her off on Simone to take care of. That's the set. So trauma work. And we do deep individual character work, deep trauma work, while your partner is sitting next to you. It is so much preferable. It opens the heart of your partner to see where this comes from. Simone has been on the receiving end of your pursuit all these years. She hates it. She hates that part of you. Now she gets to see where that frightened little girl comes from and have some empathy for. It's beautiful to do trauma work in a couple's therapy rather than you go off on your own and maybe tell her a paragraph about what it's just no. So we do deep work in front of the partner, a couple of contraindications, but by and large. And then the third piece, after you do the confrontation, after you do the trauma work, where this comes from, then we do education and skills. Let me teach you how to invite Simone to be closer to you in a way that actually might work. Don't do it that way. Do it this way. This will work. And I think it's the combination of all three of these. Very few therapies do this confrontation. And many of the trauma people just do trauma work without any confrontation and without any skill building. I love my pal Dick Schwartz. We've gone around this block, both in person and publicly. Like a lot of trauma people believe if you deal with the trauma, people will instinctively know how to be intimate with each other. I think that's just wishful thinking. You have to teach people how to do it, but you got to deal with the trauma or they won't learn. So it's a combination of all three of these things. Tough truth, looking at where this comes from, doing deep emotional trauma work, and then doing skill building, all in the crucible of the actual relationship. RLT is known for producing profound change quickly, and I think it's the combination of this three-pronged approach which produces that change.
It's really a beautiful integrative model. Thank you for walking us through it. So tell us a little bit, and I felt like you really set the scene very nicely for how you got to this most recent book, Us, where you talk a lot about toxic individualism. So, yeah, if you could map out a little bit about sort of how you came to this book idea and what is toxic individualism.
I came to it, interestingly enough, through neurobiology. I had a very gifted student who was an expert in RLT and also taught neurobiology. She was a college professor, and she taught me neurobiology. The most important question that an RLT therapist asks when they see a couple is not what are the stressors, money, the kids, in-laws, sex. A good couple can handle stress. The most important question is not what's the more, what's the choreography? The more she distances, the more she pursues, the more she pursues. Very important, not the most important. The most important question is this one. Which part of you am I speaking to? And in RLT, we talk about 3 parts of the psyche. We talk about the wise adult. I got that from Janina. I used to call it functional adult, but I changed it to wise. The wise adult, prefrontal cortex, the most mature part of the brain, 26 years old, 26 before your prefrontal cortex fully develops. The last part of the brain that developed in the human species is the species. The prefrontal cortex, the wise adult, is here and now, in the present, feet on the floor, feeling your feelings, able to stop and think and choose and deliberate. Then there's the famous wounded child part of us, very young, the first moments of life up to 3, 4, 5, just on the receiving end of the abuse or neglect and overwhelmed with it. The wounded child part of us, when I do that work, wants to crawl up in someone's lap and just be held and cry for about 1,000 years. Overwhelmed. Between these two is this critical part of us that I speak of. I inherited this from Pia Melody, the adaptive child part of us. The adaptive child part of us is the part of us that adapted to whatever was difficult in our families growing up, and it's a kid's version of a grown-up.
What can that look like?
Adaptive child, wise adult. Ready? Adaptive child, black and white. Wise adult, nuanced. Relentless, forgiving. Perfectionistic, understands imperfection. Harsh, yielding. Hard, soft. Certain, humble. One of my patients said, I don't mean to offend anybody, but the adaptive child part of her was like a little fundamentalist that lives inside. That's right. That's wrong. That's good. That's bad. Doesn't necessarily have to be aggressive. Adaptive children on the male side can often be aggressive, but you can be a codependent, over-accommodating, enabling adaptive child. More common for women, although men as well. So, but whatever it is, it's rigid. It's black and white, and it tends to be harsh. The wise adult, if you read like Erik Erikson or adult development literature, is a mature person with ambiguity and nuance and flexibility. And most of the people that I see, and I see couples on the brink, that's my beat, have lived most of their lives out of the adaptive child part of them, thinking that that's a wise adult, and it's not. And the culture at large mirrors the values of the adaptive child. And so many of the people I see are great successes in the world, but they've made a hash in their personal relationships and in their own relationship to themselves. They're not very happy. So, okay, the adaptive child is trauma-based. You get trauma triggered, you get flooded. Maybe you have about 10 seconds worth of wounded child experience, and then you move into your adaptive child to compensate, and you make the move that you keep making over, the move you learned in childhood, over and over and over again unto death, until there's a crisis or you get good therapy. And the key skill that we teach people and when we equip them to live relational lives is what I call relational mindfulness, moving out of the adaptive child part of us into the wise adult in those heated moments when you're triggered. The adaptive child is automatic, knee-jerk, boom, like that. Take a breath, take a break. I'm a big fan of breaks. Take a time out, take a walk around the block, get recentered in the part of you that remembers the relationship. And then you can use your skills. The toxic culture of individualism shows up in my living room when I lose the wise adult part of me through trauma triggering. And it's no longer us, it's you versus me. It's a win-lose power struggle. I give in to you or you give in to me. And once you start thinking in those terms, you're screwed. It's over. And what the book Us is about, and my work is about, is coming out of that individualistic you versus me, which our culture is based on, into the higher evolution of we're in this together. The essence of individualism and of patriarchy is the delusion that I am above nature and I control it. Whether the nature I'm above and in control of is my partner or my kids or my family or my body, I've got to lose 10 pounds, or my mind, I've got to stop thinking so negatively. This idea of power and control is killing us. And what the essence of relational work is, and the new book is all about, is replacing that paradigm with what I call ecological wisdom, ecological humility. You're not above nature, idiot. You're in nature. You breathe it. Take care of it or you'll die. And the way that plays out in our actual lives is our marriage, for example, our long-term relationship is our biosphere. We're not above it, we're in it. I don't talk about altruism. I talk about enlightened self-interest, happy spouse, happy house. Why do I want to keep my partner? I have these big burly guys. It's true. I have these big burly guys. They go, why should I have to work so hard to please my wife? And I go, knock, knock, idiot, because you live with her. Okay? Remember? And it's like, oh, yeah, once you replace the delusion of power over and dominance, which are the subcortical parts of the brain, with the ecological wisdom of, wait a minute, I'm in this ecosystem. It's in my interest to keep this ecosystem clean. I'm breathing it. Then you can learn relational skills. Until you cross over into that new consciousness, you don't give a shit about relational skills. You can give them lip service, but that's not really what you're about. You're about proving you're right, or nailing your partner into the ground, or getting them to do what you want them to do. All of these agendas of the adaptive child part of you. It's only the wise adult. I call it remembering love. It's only the wise adult that remembers that the person you're speaking to is not the enemy, that you care about them, and the reason why you're speaking is to make things better because you live there. It's in your interest to make things better. Wake up. And that's the shift that this whole work and new book is all about. The shift out of me versus you into us, not in that old feminine over-accommodating way, us versus me. But no, we need full voice in that us. But it's me filtered through the larger context of the two of us as a team. But I want to tell you some stories. Can I tell you?
Please.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Let me illustrate. Here's a story of coming out of the adaptive child into the wise adult and the transformation that is possible when you learn to do that. Relational mindfulness, I call it. True story. So, a guy on the brink of divorce. Why? He's a chronic liar, lies about everything. And his wife is going to leave him. And he's one of these guys, all the therapists listening to this podcast know this guy. He's one of these guys, you say to him, Bill, the sky is blue. And he says, well, I wouldn't call it blue. I would say it's aquamarine. You know, he's not going to give it to me, right? Like, blue is too much of an emission for him. So what is his relational stance? We teach RLT therapists to identify somebody's chronic relational stance in a matter of a few minutes. What's his relational stance? Well, if he's a chronic liar and the way he interacts with me is he won't say 2 + 2 = 4, I know his relational stance. This guy has a black belt in evasion. Great. So then I ask him a question. If you're not thinking relationally, he's like, wow, that's brilliant. But once you start thinking relationally, I have a saying, show me the thumbprint, I'll tell you about the thumb. If evasion is his adaptive child, who was he evading growing up? So I say to him, who tried to control you growing up? Sure enough, his father, military man, how he sat, how he ate, his friends, his class, everything. How did you deal with this incredibly controlling father? He looks at me and he smiles. That smile is important. That's the smile of resistance. He looks at me and he smiles and he says, I lied. He didn't want me to go out with Fred. I told him I was out with Henry and I went out with goddamn Fred. I did what I wanted and I lied. Brilliant. Brilliant little boy. I teach my therapist, always be respectful of the exquisite intelligence of the adaptive child. You did back then exactly what you needed to do to preserve yourself and your integrity. Good for you. But I have a saying, adaptive then, maladaptive now. You're not that 4-year-old little boy. Your wife is not your father. That's it. That was the session. They go away. True story. They come back 2 weeks later, hand in hand, all smiles. We're done. We're cured. This is our last session, which was true. It was. Okay, I say, there's a story here. Tell me the story. After the last session, the wife sends the husband to the grocery store to get a bunch of things. 12 things. True to form, he comes home with 11. Wife says to him, where's the pumpernickel? The guy says, every muscle and nerve in my body was screaming to say they were out of pumpernickel.
Yeah.
And in this one moment, I took a breath. I thought of you, Terry. See, we can lend our clients our prefrontal cortex. They can literally borrow our brains because we're neurologically linked as human beings. We're not freestanding individuals. That's bullshit. We co-regulate all day long. So he borrowed my brain. He found some courage. He looks at his wife and he says, I forgot. And she, true story, she burst into tears. And she says, I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years. That's recovery. That's what we're looking for. That's the shift out of the automatic knee-jerk learned response from childhood, the adaptive child, to the present-based, non-trauma flooded, here and now, let me take a breath and do something new, something different, something skilled, something mature. And that shift, that's recovery. That's what we're looking for.
Wow.
It's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
It's true. It's absolutely true. All right. So now I'll tell you another one. This is what's available to you when you shift out of that you versus me subcortical part. So here's the, I don't know if any of you have this, but here's the setup. I'll do it straight up, heteronormative, stereotypical. She to him, you're a reckless driver. Him to her, you're overly anxious. I'm not a reckless driver. I'm aggressive, but I'm not reckless. No, you're reckless. No, I'm aggressive. No, you're reckless. This is what I call an objectivity battle. We're going to argue over who's right and who's wrong for the next 40 years. Okay. She does a little RLT work. Next time she's in the car, it sounds like this. Hey, sweetheart, I got something I got to tell you. Okay, yeah. Look, I know you love me. Whether you think you're a reckless driver or not, when you tailgate people, switch lanes, drive 20 miles over the speed limit, I want you to know I'm sitting in the passenger seat thinking I literally think we're going to get into an accident and I'm going to be hurt. I'm petrified. Now, you love me. You don't want me to be sitting there petrified every time we're in the car together. As a favor to me, call me crazy, call me neurotic. Nevertheless, would you please drive more conservatively so that I don't have to be so miserable every time I'm next to you? And he says, another true story, he says, sure.
So different from the blaming stance, the critical stance.
A fight that could have gone on 40 years was done in 10 minutes because it was not about who's right and who's wrong, what's true, what's not true, what's fair, none of that. As a favor to me, I know you love me. I'm miserable. Give me a break, hon. Could you slow down so I could feel better? Sure. For you? Yeah. All right, I will. That's what's possible for us when we stop thinking about you versus me and remember that we're a team. When we get to the skills part of the final third, one of the key skills we teach these days is what I call loving power or soft power. Mm-hmm. And it's brand new for the culture. And I think it's the next step for women in particular. I think it's the next step for feminism. It's wild for a man to open his mouth and say that, but loving power is standing up for yourself and cherishing your partner in the same breath. I know you love me. As a favor to me, don't you want to do this? It's got a whole different energy than you drive like an asshole. Why can't you admit it? What's wrong with you? Which is just another way of saying the same thing.
Which is going to push the man away.
Push anybody away.
Anybody away, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, LoveLink listeners. We want to let you know that we've started a group practice in New York City offering individual and couples therapy, and we're currently accepting clients for virtual and in-person sessions. If you're experiencing a sense of stuckness in your life or relationship, we're here to help. Please reach out to info@lovelink.co. That's info@lovelink.co, and we'll connect you with a therapist that's the right fit for you.
I'm curious how you kind of understand codependency in this, because we live in a very individualistic culture, but of course there's also a lot of codependency. How do you work with that?
Well, codependency, one of the first and best books written about codependency years and years ago was called Compelled to Control. What people don't get about codependency is it's a form of control. It's managing the person you're with rather than being forthright with them because you're afraid to be forthright with them because you're afraid of what they'll do if you are. And, codependency is part of the quote unquote normal gender role for a woman under patriarchy. All women are supposed to be codependent. I mean, that's what the feminist literature on women's psychology was all about. The wound of over-accommodation and the loss of self. So codependency is the norm under patriarchy. Telling the truth is what's unusual, but it's still individualistic in the sense that I'm going to manage you so that I get what I want out of you. And I'm not going to take the risk of standing up to you because I don't want to deal with the consequences of what happens when you go nuts when I tell you the truth. This is why I can't teach men, women, and non-binary folk how to be intimate with each other without exploding patriarchy, because these gender roles were built under patriarchy and to sustain patriarchy. Women don't tell the truth to men. I mean, I had a great conversation with Carol Gilligan about this. I mean, she's the woman who phrased the loss of voice. That's her phrase. Whenever you hear a woman talk about finding her voice, that's Carol. And she wrote about how girls stop telling the truth at about the age of 11, 12, 13. And what I said is what needs to be said, what I can add as a family therapist and as a guy working with men is the truth that women stop telling is the truth about men. They don't confront men. And you asked me earlier about the difference of RLT. One of the main differences of RLT is that we confront grandiosity. And therapy does not do that. Therapists are nice to grandiose people. Therapists try and nurture people out of grandiosity, and it's bullshit. It doesn't work. I can't tell you how many times one partner with an egregious, insufferable, grandiose partner drags partner B in to see me or any other RLT therapist. And the RLT therapist, after some preliminary work, takes on the grandiose partner. You can't do this. You can't yell and scream at your wife and expect her to be kind and loving to you when you're done yelling and screaming at her. That is not going to work. And when we do take on the grandiose partner, 99 out of 100 times, the other partner starts to cry. And they're tears of relief. And they say to us, I've dragged this son of a gun to 8 other therapists, and you're the first person who ever told them the truth. Because therapists are taught not to tell the truth to difficult people. They're specifically taught to not do that. And that is a replication of patriarchy. Patriarchy protects the perpetrator, and so does most therapy. Go ahead, Sina.
No, I was just saying, I imagine the grandiose person, maybe not in the specific moment where they're being confronted, but ultimately really appreciates that confrontation, because there's movement there, right? Both people come to really appreciate that confrontation.
Yeah, that's what I was saying at the start, that you have to do it in a way that's skillful enough and loving enough that they get that you're on their side and you're somebody said to me, can I give them an elevator summary of RLT? And I said, yes, I can do it in 2 sentences. You want to hear my summary of RLT?
Yes.
Oh, you don't want to do that. You want to do this, right? That's it. That's my whole summary.
I love it.
Yeah,
also
great.
as you were talking about kind of women who can fall into codependent positions, and there is an element of control in that. There's also a little bit of covert grandiosity in there, right? And so, I imagine that can also be really difficult, especially for therapists, to kind of try to join through the truth and be direct about that, because in some ways it's also really socialized to be valued. Someone to take care of, the woman to appease.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, and grandiosity in women is harder to treat than grandiosity in men. I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback about that statement, but generally they are, because it is covert. Women are taught that men are babies, and women know more about how to be healthy and have relationships than men do. Women are in this catch-22 because there is an asymmetry in relational skill and relational appetite in a lot of heteronormative, heterosexual marriages. And so women wind up trying to teach their men how to be more relational, which is intrinsically condescending. And the men react. What I teach women is you're not the world's expert on how to be relational. You are the world's expert on Simone. And so you teach them with humility. This is what works for me. This would be better for me. I'm not God's gift on how you should be, but I am the voice of authority on how you should be with me. And so, yeah, women need to step out of that. And then women complain. In our culture, the way we get more of what we want in our relationship is first we're spontaneous. We don't work on it. Let them do what they do. And then we complain about how they did it wrong. That's the worst behavioral modification program I've ever heard of. I want people in general and women in particular to be more assertive up front and less reactive on the back end. Let me teach you, honey. You know, John Gray made millions of dollars on one damn point. Not that I'm jealous, but women tend to want empathic listeners and men tend to move into problem solving. There's nothing wrong. They're empathic listeners, problem solving listeners, and sharing listeners. Hey, your knee, my knee. You know, I'm a Jew from New York. We're big shit. Hey, your adolescent, my adolescent's driving me crazy. There's nothing wrong with any of those three forms of listener. What's wrong is it doesn't get negotiated up front. Then the speaker wants one form of listener offers a different, and then they're ready to kill each other. All you have to do is this. Honey, I need about 10, 15 minutes of venting. Already limiting it is great for the guy. That's already very calming. 10, 15 minutes, fine. We're not going to be here till 4 a.m. Great, I can do that. While I'm venting, I don't want you to solve my problem. This is not a teachable moment. This is not about my looking at my issues. All I want you to do is metaphorically be a girlfriend. Put your arm around me, say, that sucks. I'm sorry. I can understand why you feel bad. Tell me more about what's. That's all I want. Are you willing to do that? Okay.
Yeah, that's transformative in so many couples. I mean, if couples could really get that, that's huge.
Yeah. And I have some bad news for women who are listening. You ready? You can't get mad about not getting what you never asked for.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Yeah,
that comes
absolutely.
up a lot. Yeah.
There's this, and desire and fantasy that they will know and that you don't need to ask. Like that's often what female partners will say. I don't want to have to ask, but then they'll never know.
Yeah, I call that the Cinderella syndrome. And I have a few sayings. Girls, Cinderella's dead. Prince Charming has probably just come out of rehab. And if you want it, you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and assertively. Look, there are three phases to getting what you want in a relationship. The first one I call daring to rock the boat. This is the assertive phase. This is where you grab your partner by the collar and you say, hey, listen, pal, you better pay attention to what I'm saying. It's really important to me. So listen up and try and please me, please. This is not a joke. Once they listen, everybody gets this wrong. Once they listen, drop the sword and shield, change your energy, roll up your sleeves, and teach them what you want. This is what I call helping them win. Okay, I don't want you to solve my problem. I want you to be an empathic listener. Let me teach you what I want from you. Nobody does that. And then the third thing is once they start to give it to you, I say celebrate the glass 15% full. It was only 5% full last week, just like you would with a child. You know, your kid comes home with D's. That's terrible. What do we need? Next week, a C plus. Fantastic. Good work. What do we need to do to get that up to a B? Appreciate your partner's attempts to please you. Make it worth their while. Don't criticize, encourage. Those are the three phases. Assert what you want, teach them what winning would look like, and then give them positive feedback when they try. Nobody does that in our culture. You have to learn how to do it.
So important and very clear. That's what I love about your model. It's clear. People can have something to hold on to, right?
Thank you. Yeah, what I love about RLT is it's got its feet on the dirt and its head in the stars. I mean, I'm talking about saving the goddamn planet. I'm talking about trading in as a human species our paradigm of power and control for a paradigm of ecological humility and wisdom. And if we don't trade in that paradigm for a new one, we put this whole fucking place at risk for our kids and grandkids. The stakes could not be higher. And at the same time, let me teach you how to use this sentence instead of that sentence. I call it micro coaching. Can I talk with you about what you're doing with your face right now? It's really frozen, Mr. Jones. Are you here? I want you to go like that. Move your face around. Put some expression in your voice. You sound like a robot. How long have you been sounding like that? And it's everything from, I want you to have a new vision of what it means to be a human being on this planet, to don't complain about your partner, teach them what doing it better would look like. It's from the broadest to the most specific, and it's pretty seamless that way.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. People should go and get your book, Us. I feel like it's so important. I mean, I love that kind of multi-systems approach that you're talking about, from very small to really large. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
You guys are wonderful. Come and do our training. Go to relationallife.com and see what we're doing. And we're also doing courses for the general public on how to live relationally as
For couples?
Individuals. I just did a course on relational parenting. We're going to do a course in the spring on coming back from infidelity for both therapists and for what I call normal people. So come and learn about it.
Great.
Absolutely. Great.
Thank you so much, Terry. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
This has been
Terry.
great. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.